Alrighty, Tigercast fans, welcome back to the grading series where we're going to rank all of our players from the 2025 season and give them a school mark, the A, B, C, D ranking system. We're going in numerical order. We've got Grock on board tonight to give us a hand. And tonight's one, we are looking at Jacob Hopper, who is obviously number two in the mid. Well, where's number two? And he's one of our prime movers in the midfield, Grock. Jacob Hopper, an interesting one. Obviously, I guess the thing that's been talked about the most with Jacob Hopper and Taranto, which I'm sure we'll get to in maybe a week or two time, but it's always been about the trade coming across and has it been worth it? And I think it feels like, despite where we finished on the ladder this year, that it kind of felt like this was the first time it felt validated with the output we had from him.
Yeah, I'm a little annoyed with a lot of people, criticizing the trade and everything, because you have a look at our midfield depth this year. Prestia towards the back end, Hopper and Taranto carried that midfield all year with minimum rotations because we hadn't had anyone to come through, to give them a chop out. I mean, Dow was injured, McAuliffe injured, Lola injured, Smiley, the conditioning. Outside of those three, our first string midfielders in Prestia, Hopper and Taranto, it was makeshift midfielders like Rioli, it was Campbell going through, it was Steely Green at times. Like, there was no backup for them. So for those who are criticising the trade, I just asked them to think about how our midfield would look if we hadn't done that trade and we didn't have, one or two of Taranto and Hopper. Our midfield would have been atrocious, and it wasn't great this year. There were obviously some real holes in the midfield, but it would have been so much worse, and it would have been compounded if we hadn't have done that trade and had those two senior mids in there in the first place.
I agree, and on the back of everything that you had just said, I think it's only fair and reasonable that he gets an A as well. I mean, it's been easily his best performed year, almost for his career, definitely for us, maybe even for the Giants. And I think as well we need to give Serple some credit too for getting him fit and on the park for the whole season, which has been a big part of, I suppose, the frustrations of his time at the club, as he hasn't been able to get his body right. But even down to that final Geelong game, he was running on top of the ground pretty much most weeks and looking really, really good, getting from contest to contest and doing everything that we wanted him to do. And to your point, I thought that there was going to be a point in time, especially in the back half of the year, where he was going to get burnt out because of the sheer volume of work. Like you said, like they were doing upwards of about 90% of CBAs every week in, week out, no matter what. It kind of dipped a little bit towards the end, but it was still a power of work that he was doing in there. And as much as we sort of all did complain about the mix-up of the midfield, which I still think is valid, I tip my hat to players like Hopper who were going in there and having a crack at every centre bounce, just fighting tooth and nail the whole game.
Yeah. And again, the midfield mix was literally, it came down to player availability. So I'll give him a bit of a pass on that. And obviously we know that there's a real lack of leg speed in and around the contest as well, which hopefully we can address in this draft and trade period. But again, one of the biggest things for Hopper this year was the fact that he managed to get through last preseason with no hiccups, no surgeries, nothing. He had a clean run, which I think is the first time it's happened since, I think, maybe his first year at the Giants. So it's no wonder that he's had probably a career best year for him, and he still makes the odd mistake. And I think sometimes he takes a little bit too long to make a decision with the ball and gets caught sometimes. But the pleasing thing for me is, as you mentioned, he was running games out, which is a credit to the conditioning staff. But there was a purple patch there where he was hitting the scoreboard. And that's been one of the biggest knocks on the midfield. Obviously, Hopper and Taranto they weren't getting forward enough and weren't contributing outside of the actual clearances and centre bounces. So I thought it was really pleasing for that middle period after the bye, where Hopper and Taranto were actually hitting the scoreboard. So if we can get another clean preseason into Hopper and another year of development into some of the younger mids. Hopefully we can see McAuliffe. Hopefully we can see Dow, who obviously hasn't got a contract yet, but hopefully, Dow, Lawler, Smiley, hopefully we can see if we can get these younger boys in. I think it's definitely going to help Hopper be a bit more dynamic. And if we can take some of the load off his shoulders, I think, again, I think he can have a better year next year than he did this year.
And I think he was able to play to his strengths for a lot of this year, which is extraction work. He led the way for us for centre clearances on 54. Total clearances, he won as well, 130. Uncontested possessions, 354, he won. And contested possessions, 266, he was first in as well. Now, I suppose the knock on his game is, despite winning a lot of the clearances, it was probably the value of the clearance that we weren't really getting. So I think the progression for him next year, and this is depending on availability of other players, of course, is then utilising the other midfielders with the better skill set to be the ones delivering the ball. And I mean, that's not necessarily a knock. It might seem like a knock on Hopper, but it's just everyone's got different strengths. And his strength was finding the footy and extracting it and getting out of a tight situation. But then he found himself having to do both things simultaneously almost. And he did it really well, but you'd probably want to see that uncontested number probably drop, I guess, and get him getting other players out into space. But as long as he can keep hunting and keep finding it, there'll always be a spot in the centre square for someone like that.
Absolutely. He's been the type of midfielder that we haven't really had since probably Shane Tuck or Daniel Jackson, just the work rate, just pure grunt type midfielder. And I definitely think the clearance side of our game, I think, has probably improved. The contest side, again, it's just the glaring lack of outside speed when we do win the clearance. As you mentioned, the quality of the clearances that we get, because we don't have those outside runners, it's often just a long high kick into the forward line, and with the young forward line that we have, hasn't really worked out too well for us. So I think the clearance work of Hopper will go up once he's got some, as you mentioned, some better skilled or quicker players around him to dish off to.
He was actually also ranked second for score involvements for the year too on 109, which I probably didn't expect him to feature him. But again, it just goes to show his work rate around the ground. And the amount of work he was doing week in, week out was pretty exceptional. He came fourth in tackles, 71 tackles he had. It's just been a brutal year. Even his meters gained, he was ranked fourth for the club, which is somewhat impressive for a midfielder. Again, it just shows how much he was getting the ball.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the way that our midfield structure is set up with the clearances and the lack of quality outside of the contest, which means that the work that he does often gets lost because you don't see it, because it's such a contest there that you don't see how hard he's actually working, the tackles that he's laying, the contests that he's halving or killing. I think people have been pretty harsh on Hopper this year. Again, his work rate away from the contest, I think that was one of the biggest knocks that we had on him when we drafted, was just if he could cover the ground throughout a game. But the fact that he's been able to work on it, get a clean preseason, I think it just shows that he can contribute something positive to the club, and he is a valuable piece. But it's just getting the other pieces around him to make sure that he's being the best version of himself and effective. And that's now on Blair and Rygeishan to be able to institute those pieces.
And do you think, in terms of looking toward 2026, do you think he'll have the adaptability to play a secondary position? Because with the amount of other kids we've got coming through, at some point in time, there'll be a likelihood that he and a few others will have to learn how to play a bit more half forward while other names get thrown through the mix. Do you reckon he's got that versatility? I know I suppose it ties back to the fact that you mentioned he was hitting the scoreboard a bit more, so we'll need to see a bit more of that.
Yeah, I think he can. I think by the end of next year, hopefully Smiley is established as a midfielder. If not Smiley, maybe McAuliffe, who's in and under and a bit of an outside, can maybe take over what we think Prestia offers going forward. Obviously, with Prestia, likely his next year will be his last. If we can get some of the youngsters in there, allowing Hopper to use his gut running and just work rate to get into some positions. I definitely think we can see him, moving into a half forward role at times, allowing, midfield minutes into someone like Lawler, Smiley, even Houghton at times. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Hopper next year. And I'd be disappointed in the club if, again, by the end of next year, he was averaging 90% CBAs per game. I think if that's the case, something has gone wrong with the game plan or recruiting.
It just wouldn't be fair on him as well to physically back that up again. It's just monumental effort. But yeah. Jacob Hopper, take a bow. You had a really, really, really good year and deserved the A. Just an absolute workhorse this year. And work rate like that does evolve, and it does drag other people over with you and things like that. So it's teaching others good habits as well. And I remember back to seeing some of the preseason training videos at the camp. He was smashing it out, and the boys were getting really pumped for him because he was just annihilating it. So hopefully more of that for 2026 with Jacob Hopper, and we look forward to seeing what he can do in the 2026 season as part of the midfield brigade.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing what he can do.